John Stewart, beautiful to have you here. This is a Salon in the series of Salon Center for Applied Dialectics. This is the first part of a series where we are talking about scaffolding, metasystemic or maybe dialectic thinking. So, John Stewart, we are very eager to hear you and your presentation.
My background that's relevant to this is that I've had published numerous papers in international science journals on evolution, particularly big picture perspectives of evolution and their implications for humanity. Part of the material I've been developing on evolution focuses on the trajectory of evolution, and there's two broad trajectories during the evolution of life on Earth. One is towards the formation and emergence of cooperative organisations of increasing scale, and the other is towards increasing evolvability. And evolvability is the ability to adapt effectively. So initially evolution had a very simple method of evolvability, trial and error, genetic mutations and so on. But evolution, the evolutionary mechanism has itself evolved, and now as it manifests in humans, it's our intelligence and our culture that drives our evolution, no longer trial and error. And a significant part of that in human beings is the emergence of a capacity to develop mental models of our environment and of our interactions with our environment. And the stage that humanity is at is that it has not yet developed comprehensively a capacity to form mental models of complex phenomenon. We're good at developing mechanistic models, so parts of reality that are mechanistic, our science is able to deal with those and develop a body of knowledge. But in relation to complex phenomenon, which unfortunately is the majority of the reality that we interact with, current model building capacities, current thinking is not adequate to the task. So I'll be talking here today about the development of that capacity to model complex reality, and I'll be dealing specifically with how it might be scaffolded in oneself and in other individuals and in groups. I'm talking about scaffolding metasystemic cognition. That's some details about myself. I'm a Melbourne-based member of the Evolution, Complexity and Cognition Research Group of the Free University of Brussels. And just a quick overview of what I'll be covering. First of all, I'll be outlining what I mean by metasystemic cognition. Then why is metasystemic cognition critically important? Where is metasystemic cognition superior to analytical rational thinking? Then I'll be dealing with how can metasystemic cognition be scaffolded. And basically, I'll cover that in two components: the recursive practicing of model building skills, and then practices that develop the capacity to see one's thought and feeling as an object. Then I'll be dealing with how can metasystemic cognition be spread quickly, and then I'll have a slide of the resources that give more detail and background to what I'll be covering. What do I mean by metasystemic cognition? Basically, metasystemic cognition, as I use the term, is the development of the capacity to form mental models of complex phenomenon as they change through time. So it entails the capacity to build mental models of complex systems, of those systems in evolution and those systems interacting and interpenetrating through time. What I mean by metasystemic cognition is therefore very similar to Otto Lasky's dialectical thinking. His moments of dialectic or quadrants and thought forms define a wide range of the movements in thought that are necessary to build models of complex reality. I'd point out that the reason why I use the term metasystemic cognition and not dialectical thinking is because dialectical thinking means many different things to many different people. As far as I'm aware, the use of it in the extremely broad and comprehensive form that Otto uses it hasn't been used historically by thinkers. For example, Hegel's dialectical thinking and Marx's dialectical thinking is far more limited than what's captured by the thought forms, and therefore it isn't as effective as developing models of complex reality. Why is metasystemic cognition critically important? Well, first of all, it's by definition, it's essential for understanding complex phenomenon. More importantly, it's critically important for using those models to identify interventions in reality and what their consequences will be. So if you have a mental model of complex phenomenon, then you can change elements of that model, follow through the consequences of that. So it's essential for strategizing when one is facing complex phenomenon. The existential threats that face humanity at present, such as global warming, nuclear war, general overshooting of the carrying capacity of the planet, and so on, they're complex issues. And to understand and develop strategies for dealing with those issues, for solving those problems, for avoiding the existential threats, one must also have mental models of complex social, political, and economic systems, because it's through those systems that we will need to, through those systems, that we will have to implement measures that avoid those problems. So the survival of human civilization depends on the spread of metasystemic cognition. It's that significant. And it's more significant because of the fact that very few have that capacity at present. Metasystemic cognition is a very rare capacity amongst human beings. It's in our science and in the humanities, there are very few metasystemic thinkers. Most science is underpinned by analytical rational thinking. So our current cognition can't do complexity. And when I refer to our current cognition, I use various terms: first Enlightenment thinking. So our current cognition arose and spread to significant numbers of human beings only about 300 or 400 years ago, with the first Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment. It also, what I mean by analytical rational cognition, also broadly equates to formal operations thinking in Piagetian terms, and as I've indicated, it underpins current science. Where is metasystemic cognition superior to analytical rational thinking? It's worth understanding this in some detail, because it indicates and forms a basis for what's missing from analytical rational cognition that needs to be included in metasystemic cognition, if metasystemic cognition is to develop and be able to model complex phenomenon. Analytical rational cognition is largely limited to building mechanistic models. And this is evidenced in first Enlightenment thinking, first Enlightenment science, our current science, which focuses on models such as billiard balls interacting with one another, seeing how they interact and predicting how they unfold. But if you have too many billiard balls or they form systems, then analytical rational cognition is quickly overwhelmed by that complexity, and it has to simplify things in order to build models. So analytical rational cognition builds models that focus down on isolated phenomenon. So it largely ignores context. Most of the discoveries of science, particularly physics, discover laws that apply and can be applied with ignoring context, where context does not change those laws, they're context independent. Secondly, analytical rational cognition builds models that comprise objects or abstractions with fixed attributes. It largely ignores process. It ignores the fact that all objects are in fact processes. Even mountain ranges, for example, are processes. They're not objects. So it reifies processes. Thirdly, in analytical rational models, objects interact according to laws, and they're unchanged by those interactions. So it largely ignores how the objects or abstractions interrelate to produce whole systems, and interrelate, including by co-evolving. They both change in relationship to one another. Finally, it represents systems mechanistically. When it puts these components together, it doesn't have models that are dynamical and evolving. It has mechanistic models. In general, it produces models that can be thought through by analytical rational thinking. So this is linear logic and so on. It comes up with models that are analysable. As a consequence, analytical rational thinking works for only a very small proportion of reality, because most of reality is complex. It's not mechanistic. Alfred North Whitehead said about 100 years ago that current science, and science hasn't changed a lot since then, 100 years ago, in terms of its methodology, current science can only lead to the understanding of about 10% of the things that are really important to humanity. A manifestation of the limitations of analytical rational thinking is that science has failed miserably to understand and develop effective models of political science, social systems, and so on. In other words, the content of the humanities. The reason why the humanities are on a different planet, as C.P. Snow indicated, to science, is because the subject matter of the humanities is too complex to be dealt with by the scientific method. Ironically, science criticises the humanities for its lack of scientific rigour and so on, but a better perspective is to see that the scientific method doesn't work for the humanities, for organic systems and so on. Nonetheless, first Enlightenment science, underpinned by analytical rational thinking, has been very effective in limited areas. It's produced our mechanistic technology. It's changed the planet. It's changed life on this planet, sometimes for the better. Now, one way of illustrating and experiencing the difference between analytical rational thinking and metasystemic cognition and the models that both of them develop is to compare our built environment with an ecosystem. So presumably you're all in rooms at the moment, and those rooms have flat surfaces, meet at right angles, they're box-like, and there's lots of books and so on in your rooms that that can be thought through. They are the product of analytical rational thinking. The built environment of humanity is an illustration of what analytical rational thinking can do and its limitations. And you see its limitations when you go out into a natural ecosystem and compare what's in the human built environment with what's in that ecosystem. One can be understood by analytical rational cognition and has been produced by analytical rational cognition, while the ecosystems are far more complex and need metasystemic cognition if they're to be understood. How can metasystemic cognition be scaffolded. The goal of scaffolding is to help individuals to develop the thought processes that are needed to generate complex models and operate those complex models, simulate them in one's head and so on, and use them to identify the consequences of changing elements of those models. And this is particularly useful in strategizing. So the great breakthrough in understanding how to develop metasystemic cognition and how to scaffold it was Otto Lasky's 4 quadrants and his 28 thought forms. Basically, the quadrants cover what analytical rational thinking leaves out of its mechanistic models. Because it leaves out, it identifies what's left out, it's directly useful for indicating to other individuals and for ourselves where our attention has to go in order to remediate those absences, in order to include in our mental models those things that are left out by analytical rational thinking, and therefore produce metasystemic models that are capable of representing and understanding complex reality. I'll be outlining here that metasystemic cognition can be scaffolded permanently by 2 categories of training. One is by practicing an individual, practicing, whether coached or doing it themselves, the implementation of the movements in thought and quadrants to build models. To do this, as I've indicated, they're aided by the declarative knowledge contained in the quadrants and thought forms, and most importantly, the process must involve the recursive improvement of the resulting emerging procedural knowledge that they acquire as they practice the building of models and using the declarative knowledge contained in the quadrants and thought forms. So that's one major component of scaffolding. The other is practicing the disembedding from thinking. And that requires disembedding from both analytical rational thinking and metasystemic thinking. The crucial capacity that has been developed from this is to be able to see one's thinking as object, and therefore being able to manipulate it consciously. And secondly, it enables escaping slavery to analytical rational thinking and feelings as well. The end result of those 2 components of scaffolding is to internalize the interlocutory process within the individual. And by interlocutory process, I mean the kind of process that Otto's developed for an interviewer, helping to scaffold, to identify another person's use of thought forms and scaffold improvements. This process internalizes that in an individual. And most importantly, it enables ongoing self-scaffolding. So it enables the conscious scaffolding of one's thinking to the metasystemic level throughout one's life. It becomes a lifelong exercise. So the first of the categories of scaffolding that I was going to cover was the recursive practicing of model building skills. The first thing I need to emphasise, and this is very important, is that the actual practice of model building is essential for developing procedural skills. Memorising the thought forms won't do it. Being able to pass an exam and get 100% on the thought forms and quadrants doesn't necessarily develop any procedural skills in an individual. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily enable metasystemic thinking. So procedural skills have to be learnt by practice. They can't be learnt by reading a book. And classic examples are learning a serve in tennis or learning how to ride a bicycle. You can't learn how to ride a bicycle or do a tennis serve by reading a book. They might give you pointers, but then you have to develop the procedural skills by actually practicing the activity. So the first step in the this practice of recursively building model building skills is to build from of a particular complex phenomenon that's of interest to the person who is developing the metasystemic skill. That model building, they draw on the quadrants and thought forms, but they attempt to be conscious of the process that they're going to build that model of the complex phenomenon. That's the first step, and it's important that the person does this without first studying the field and examining the body of knowledge that exists about that particular complex phenomenon. It's important they do it from scratch, and that they do it without reference to that knowledge, because in the second step, they assess their model in the light of the feedback from others and from the expert body of knowledge. Where they find deficiencies in their model, they do two things. They amend the content of their model. In other words, they make their model better, but the most important step in the scaffolding process is not that. It's to actually modify the thought processes that they use to generate the model. So they need to reflect on the thought processes that we used and amend their thought processes so that their meta-modeling capacity, their ability to build models now would be more successful than their first attempt. So they identify how they have to change their model building skills in order to not leave out the thing that they've found that they've left out from their model. Now, this process is then repeated recursively, drawing on thought forms each time. So there's a sequence of testing the model, in effect, against existing knowledge and testing it against reality and so on. And each time identifying where the model has to be amended and then going to the meta model in order to change the meta model. The goal is to develop a meta model and skills that enable better metasystemic cognition. The second major component that I mentioned in scaffolding is the practice of seeing thought and feeling as object. This capacity is critically important for the recursive self-improvement approach that I have just outlined. It enables the conscious use of thought forms and model building skills and the recursive improvement process, because it enables you to see as object what the actual thought processes are that you're using to build your complex models. When one first begins to do this, one might, in my experience, you won't see much at all. The development of this capacity for seeing your thinking as object will develop the ability progressively to see more and more, and it'll be further built by the recursive self-improvement process. So that's being able to see your thinking as object. Secondly, being able to do that provides access to right brain resources for model building. So analytical rational cognition is all in the head. It's all in conscious thinking, in declarative knowledge. But the model building capacity, if it's to capture complex reality, must draw on additional resources than those that are drawn on by analytical rational cognition, such as intuition, pattern recognition, and this enables integration of the right and left brain, of the head and the heart, anima and animus, and the marriage of the bride and groom, which comes from alchemy. These are metaphors for accessing these non-linear logical resources that are essential if a model is to represent complex reality as it ceaselessly changes through time. It's worth quickly noting that being able to access those resources have a similar effect to walking in nature, showering and napping and so on. In other words, those activities that many creative artists and scientists have indicated promote insights are basically achieved by accessing right brain resources, and these are accessed by activities that quieten the thinking mind. So that brings us to the third importance of seeing thought as object, which is it enables disembedding from slavery to analytical rational thinking. Disembedding from the slavery to analytical rational thinking is no simple thing, as is evidenced by the fact that that the interaction between science and humanities. So researchers in the humanities need complex thinking and complex models in order to attempt to understand what's going on in social systems and so on. They're continually criticised by science for not being scientifically rigorous. What doesn't happen generally is that people who are mainstream scientists see the limitations of their analytical rational thinking in complex phenomena like those dealt with in the humanities, because they're embedded in their analytical rational thinking, they're embedded in the methodologies of current science, and it's no small thing to move between developmental levels. So disembedding from slavery to analytical rational thinking is to avoid the obligate use of, is also important for analytical rational thinkers, because if one points out to them using the thought forms and quadrants what's missing from their thinking, they can move attention to those things that are left out, but they'll tend to develop analytical rational models of what they've left out, not the fluid, complex processes, context, and relationship that are needed to represent those phenomena. The seeing thought and feeling as object is also important for disembedding from slavery to emotions. So to use Keegan's terms, one has to move from emotions having you to you having emotions. That's what disembedding from emotions involves. It's important for being able to implement complex cognitive strategies, because to do so can often conflict and be undermined by emotional responses and so on. And this enables one to let those emotions go through, to dissipate, to not control one's behaviour, and therefore it gives one the capacity to actually implement complex strategies. Ultimately, this disembedding process produces awakening and presence. So what is the process that can train this disembedding capacity? It's meditation-like practices. So the essence of meditation, of nearly all practices of meditation, is the practice of disengaging from being embedded in thought and feeling, and doing this repeatedly. So the mindfulness meditation instructions, for example, involve resting attention on sensations of the breath, and then when one finds oneself embedded in thinking and emotion and no longer giving attention to the sensations of the breath, one moves one's attention away from the disembeddedness and moves it back to the sensations of the breath. So one is practicing disengaging, and this stills the mind. Now, it's really important that to use a meditation-like practice like this in order to scaffold one's thinking, then one must be able to do it not just on the meditation cushion, in a darkened room, absence all abstractions. One must develop the ability to do it in the midst of ordinary life. Finally, the recursive practice of model building that I outlined will also help to develop disembedding, because it involves giving attention to one's thoughts, turning attention inwards, giving attention to one's thoughts, and being able to see them as object. So how can metasystemic cognition be spread quickly, given its critical importance for humanity and our survival in the face of existential threats and so on? We can take advantage of the capacity of the economic system to spread anything that increases profits. So the old saying is that build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. Metasystemic cognition is far better than building a better mousetrap, because building a better mousetrap creates profit opportunities for a limited number of businesses. Metasystemic cognition basically is far more significant, because most businesses now are embedded in environments that are far too complex for them to cognize effectively. They're embedded in social systems, competitive markets, government systems, and so on. And they have to strategize within that environment, and you can't do it with analytical rational cognition. So most executives in most businesses are currently in over their heads, as are their equivalents in governmental bodies and so on. So if the scaffolding of metasystemic cognition can be packaged in a way that improves profit capacities for business, profit opportunities for business, then it will spread very quickly. So one way, one form of packaging is using the scaffolding to temporarily scaffold groups of executives to enable them to strategize more effectively in complex environments. And this can be done by a facilitator who is adept at using the thought forms and the quadrants, and who in real time can facilitate the group to see what their analytical rational thinking leaves out, and to facilitate the group's building in real time of a shared model of complex phenomenon that need to be understood and dealt with for the business to maximise its profits. And the second way of doing it is to scaffold metasystemic cognition permanently in executives. Because if it's done by a facilitator with a group, when the scaffolding is removed, in other words, when the facilitator leaves, then there'll be no permanent vertical movement. The individuals will, in the group, will fall back to their analytical rational cognition that they're typically embedded in. The competition in a market, of course, drives this process, because once a competitor in a particular industry sector develops the capacity to strategize using metasystemic cognition, then all its competitors must follow. And eventually educational institutions will do so also. So they're the resources. There's my review of Otto's primer, which is an 8-page sort of overview of analytical rational cognition, its limitations, and how these can be overcome by metasystemic cognitions. There's a page on my website with numerous links to materials about the escalator program that was originally developed by myself and Victoria Wilding. There's a report from someone who's undertaken the escalator program, so you get a perspective from the scaffoldee. And that's 8 pages or so it's short. Then the PowerPoint slides link, and then the Amazon link to Otto's 3-volume set, which I understand is going to be out in early November. Development is a process, ongoing process, but as many thinkers and theoreticians have concluded, there are discernible levels that a person goes through. None of those levels are stable in an equilibrium sense. That, you know, they're not narrow equilibria that people are locked into. So the term in complexity science for these levels is metastable. So they're processes far from equilibrium in thermodynamic terms, but they have a dynamical stability. They're dynamical attractors. So that's the reason why I use the term metastable. Its significance is that they're like an equilibrium to the extent that the individual experiences them as working, as doing what they want to do cognitively. So someone is embedded in the analytical rational level basically thinks that all questions that can be answered by their analytical rational cognition. They can't see outside their analytical rational cognition to see what's missing. They can't see it from a higher level, so they're locked into it. But not locked into it in a mechanistic sense, but in a metastable sense. To give another quick example, we've probably, many of us have had the experience of when we get angry at our dog, it can run and hide its head underneath a couch. So it can't see you getting angry at it. It thinks or experiences, because it's got slavery to its visual field, it thinks that you can't see it. And it's very difficult to get the dog out of that. It's got slavery to its visual field. That's a Vygotskian terminology. So Keegan, I think, used the term that stages are truces. So they're dynamic. So most people hopefully have seen a diagram of an attractor in chaos theory. And that is not a stable point. The attractor is like a basic attraction. Yeah. People who have what I call metasystemic cognition and use that in a particular domain. So, like, for example, Gregory Bateson, in his great book, Steps to an Ecology of Mind, it evidences metasystemic thinking. Basker as well. So that, there are a number of people, not many, but who use metasystemic thinking. Does their use of metasystemic thinking tend to produce it in others? And no, it doesn't. In fact, there's a wonderful little anecdote that occurred in New York back in, I think it was in the 30s, where there was a reuniting of Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, and they'd both, in the early part of the 20th century, tried to develop a rationalisation of mathematics and worked together and produced Principia Mathematica, a famous book. However, they went their different ways after that. Alfred North Whitehead developed metasystemic cognition. Bertrand Russell was a genius at the analytical rational level, but never developed metasystemic cognition. When they met on a stage, reunited after many years in New York, Alfred North Whitehead told the audience, he said, Bertie thinks that I'm muddle-headed, and I think he's simple-minded. So to a metasystemic thinker, Analytical rational thinkers are simple-minded, mechanistically minded, and so on, while an analytical rational thinker, a metasystemic thinker is muddle-headed. So an analytical rational thinker reading the products of metasystemic thinking will not be impressed by it in general. They won't be able, because to understand it, they would have to be able to build in their own mind the metasystemic kind of model that the metasystemic thinker used to come up with their breakthrough in science or their breakthrough in the humanities or whatever. So that's the problem with spreading it. It won't spread simply by writing books about it or books that apply it. This is what I'm getting at about procedural knowledge. What has to be installed, to use mechanistic language, in the mind of a person is the actual ability to use the thought forms in real time to build a model, and that's procedural knowledge. And writing a treatise about doing that, or a diary about doing that, won't produce it in another person either. They've actually got to be embedded in an environment where they're required to build their own models, reflect on the actual model building process, and that's the critical part of it. Reflect on their model building process. Then when they see that their model is lacking in some respect, then they need to adjust not only their model but their meta model, their model of model building. And if they do that recursively, and you need to do it throughout your life, I mean, to me, it's a great day when I find that my mental model of some complex area of reality, such as an area in evolutionary theory, which I spend my days and nights thinking about, when I find that it's flawed and limited in some way, that's a wonderful day, because it means that I can go in, identify an aspect of my model building process that's inadequate, and I can then correct it, and then correct it in the actual models I build of complex reality. So yeah, it's all about procedural knowledge and how to develop that, and scaffolding. Yeah, I think I've emphasised in my presentation that what was a key in my own life, and I think is a key in anyone's development of metasystemic cognition, is the genius of your moments of dialectic and thought forms, because it's critically important for making object the actual thought processes that are needed to instantiate metasystemic thinking. So I'd learned at a young age through accidents, not through any capacity of my own, but accidents of circumstance, to treat analytical rational thinking as object, and to treat my problem-solving capacities using analytical rational cognition as object, and using that capacity to be able to improve my problem-solving strategies and so on, rather than just solving problems. I knew what approaches I was using, and I could improve them, enhance them, and so on recursively as I developed. However, I developed an intuitive capacity over the years to do metasystemic thinking, but I couldn't see it as object. And it's your thought forms and moments of dialectic that enabled me to scaffold my ability to see it as object and go to a metacognitive level in relation to metasystemic thinking. And it's that metacognitive level which is essential for teaching it, in my view, scaffolding it in others and so on. So, thanks for those foundations, Otto.
Thank you, John. I want to summarize two things that I'm especially grateful to you for opening new doors in my thinking. So the first aspect is the metaphor of disembedding. So there is a bed where our thoughts flow, and how can we disembed? And even if we think we are thinking in a metasystemic fashion, or maybe even if we do, it could even still be a bed. So how can we again and again disembed from these flows of thought that we have been used to? So that's the first aspect, the metaphor of disembedding. And the second one is the aspect that you put on the question of meditation, on a special form of, I don't know, cognitive awareness meditation or something like this. And also linking it to phenomena that we are experiencing. I think you shared walking, showering, and napping. So I think a lot of people can relate to these experiences where they have thoughts and images, and they can make connections and see things in a larger context, etc. Capacities that I do not have in normal waking time. And I think if we can relate people's experience and memories of these small short phases of, I don't know, wider cognition, if with this practice and training, then maybe people could also be attracted and get a hint or get a flavor of where we are aiming at. At the same time, I think you started with the challenge of the global wicked problems, etc., of these big questions, climate crisis, etc. And of course, my question is, how can we scale? How can we do this in a fashion that is not aiming for the next 100 years, but for the next, I don't know, 3 years, where we have still some things to change. So these are the questions I'm holding. I'm very much looking forward to the next Salon with Otto, and then the Salon after that with the both of you in dialogue. So I'm really hoping that we open new doors in our own thinking, and then can hopefully get the snowball rolling and running. Thank you so much for taking the time, for participating. All the best. Good night, good evening, good morning. Bye-bye.